They gave the black girl to marry a Comanche warrior for peace, but he taught her what true love is. The trembling girl stood at the edge of the Comanche camp as village elders bartered her future like cattle. The townspeople viewed her with cold indifference, a disposable pawn to appease savages. They whispered she'd disappear into the wilderness, forgotten and broken. But the stoic warrior chosen as her husband harbored secrets that would shatter their assumptions. His piercing eyes held intelligence that defied every stereotype, and his quiet strength promised protection she'd never known. Their union could either forge an unbreakable bridge between two desperate worlds, or ignite the very war it was meant to prevent. As government forces circled like vultures, ready to claim Comanche lands, the fate of both communities now rested on whether two outcasts could find strength in each other. Would their forbidden bond become salvation, or seal everyone's destruction? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Ridge as Araminta Sable bent over her sewing. Her nimble fingers worked the needle through rough fabric while the general store buzzed with nervous chatter. Cattle had gone missing again. The townspeople blamed the Comanche. Araminta kept her head down. She had learned to make herself invisible when tensions ran high. The white settlers barely acknowledged her existence on good days. On bad days, they remembered she was there. The bell above the door clanged as Reverend Ezekiel Boone swept inside. His black coat billowed behind him like wings of judgment. The conversations died instantly. Even the children stopped their fidgeting. Boone's voice boomed across the cramped space. Federal cavalry was coming. The government demanded peace, or they would solve the Indian problem with bullets. The town council would meet tonight to discuss options. Araminta's needle paused mid-stitch. She had seen what happened when the cavalry arrived. Burnt homesteads, shallow graves, women who never smiled again. That evening, lamplight flickered through the church windows as the council gathered. Araminta walked past on her way home, her day's earnings clutched in her worn. They spoke about her like livestock, a commodity to be traded for peace. Footsteps approached from inside. She melted into the shadows between buildings, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened and several council members emerged, their faces grim but resolved. They had made their decision. The next morning brought Naomi Gray to her doorstep. The older woman's weathered face held sympathy mixed with resignation. She had lived between worlds long enough to recognize when the powerful needed someone powerless to sacrifice. Naomi explained what would happen. The Comanche war chief Chayton Blackhawk had agreed to the marriage treaty. Araminta would be taken to the neutral ground between territories. The ceremony would be simple. Her new life would begin immediately. Araminta's hands shook as she packed her few possessions into a canvas bag. 2 dresses, a spare pair of shoes, her mother's thimble. The life she had built, thread by thread, was ending. Naomi offered what comfort she could. The Comanche treated their women with respect. They valued strength and courage. Araminta possessed both, even if the townspeople were too blind to see it. The wagon arrived at dawn. Araminta climbed onto the rough wooden seat beside the driver, a grizzled man who avoided her eyes. Naomi pressed a small bundle of dried meat into her hands and whispered a prayer for safe travels. Cedar Ridge disappeared behind them as they rolled across the endless prairie. The driver remained silent for hours, his attention fixed on the horizon. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. The Comanche were not savages, despite what people said. They were fighting for survival, just like everyone else. The sun climbed higher as they traveled deeper into disputed territory. Araminta watched the landscape change from farmland to wild grass that stretched beyond sight. This was a different world, with different rules. She would need to learn quickly, or perish. By midday, smoke appeared in the distance. The driver pointed toward a cluster of teepees arranged in a perfect circle. The Comanche camp. Araminta's new home, whether she wanted it or not. Warriors emerged from the camp as their wagon approached. They sat tall on painted horses, their faces. The ceremony took place at sunset with both tribes watching. Words were spoken in Comanche that she did not understand. Gifts were exchanged. Her old life officially ended as her new one began. That night, Chayton led her to a large teepee decorated with intricate beadwork. He gestured for her to enter first. Inside, sleeping furs were arranged on opposite sides of the space, a clear message that he would not force what she was not ready to give. The fire crackled between them as they sat in careful silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in a world that had never wanted her. But tonight, for the first time in years, Araminta felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Hope. Dawn brought the sound of children's laughter outside the teepee. Araminta emerged to find Chayton already awake, tending to his horses with practiced ease. The morning light revealed details she had missed in yesterday's ceremony. His clothing was finely crafted. His movements spoke of education beyond what any savage should possess. The camp bustled with daily activities. Women prepared morning meals while men discussed hunting plans. Children chased each other between the teepees, their joy infectious despite the uncertainty hanging over everyone's future. Chayton approached with 2 wooden bowls of stew. He handed one to Araminta and sat beside her on a woven blanket. Steam rose between them as they ate in comfortable silence. Finally, he spoke words that changed everything. He had attended the mission school at San Antonio for 6 years. The priests taught him English, French, Spanish, and Latin. They wanted to make him civilized, to strip away his heritage and remake him in their image. Araminta nearly dropped her bowl. This was not the story she expected from a Comanche war chief. Chayton continued with quiet intensity. He learned everything they offered, then chose to return to his people. Education was a weapon, but it could serve his tribe's survival rather than their destruction. The revelation struck her like lightning. Chayton had specifically requested an outsider bride, not from cruelty or indifference, but from understanding. He needed someone who knew what it meant to be dismissed, undervalued, treated as less than human. Her hands trembled as the implication. Comanche customs required patience and humility. The women initially viewed her with suspicion. Some whispered that she was a spy sent to betray their secrets. But Araminta had survived worse than whispered doubts. She worked alongside the women, learning their skills while sharing her own. Her nimble fingers adapted quickly to beadwork and hide preparation. More importantly, she began teaching willing children to read English letters scratched in the dirt. The lessons started small. A few curious youngsters gathered around as she showed them how marks on paper could hold meaning. Soon, teenagers joined the group. Even some adults lingered at the edges, pretending disinterest while absorbing every word. Chayton watched these informal schools with growing admiration. Araminta possessed a natural gift for teaching, honed by years of secretly educating fellow slaves despite harsh consequences. She understood that knowledge was power, and power shared strengthened everyone. Their evening conversations revealed deeper truths about each other. Araminta had taught reading to dozens of enslaved children, always in shadow, always risking punishment. She carried scars from beatings meant to keep her ignorant and compliant. Chayton shared his own struggles with identity and purpose. The mission school had opened his eyes to the broader world, but also showed him how his people were viewed by those who claimed moral authority. He returned home determined to prepare his tribe for an inevitable clash with advancing civilization. Their partnership deepened as autumn approached. Araminta's teaching expanded beyond basic literacy to include writing and simple arithmetic. The tribal council initially resisted, but results spoke louder than tradition. Children who learned English could better navigate interactions with traders and government officials. The first test of their alliance came when federal cavalry appeared on the horizon. Dust clouds announced their approach hours before the blue uniforms became visible. The entire camp tensed as riders formed military formations in the distance. Chayton gathered his warriors, while Araminta helped pack essential supplies for potential evacuation. The children she had been teaching looked to her with frightened eyes. She offered what comfort she could, while her own heart raced with fear. The cavalry commander rode forward under a white flag. His message was brief and brutal. Invaluable, as she decoded the legal language that disguised land theft as humanitarian policy. The papers revealed disturbing details. Railroad companies had already surveyed Comanche territory. Government officials had divided tribal lands among investors before negotiations even began. The forced relocation was merely the final step in a carefully planned seizure. Araminta's anger burned cold and focused as she read. This was the same systematic destruction she had witnessed against her own people. Different methods, same result. Powerful interests crushing anyone too weak to resist. But knowledge created opportunity. Understanding the enemy's true motivations suggested new strategies for resistance. Araminta and Chayton spent the night developing plans that could expose the corruption behind the relocation order. Morning brought new resolve. They would not flee or fight. Instead, they would use the weapons of their oppressors against them. Education, documentation, and legal challenges rather than bullets and bloodshed. The real battle was just beginning. The tribal council gathered at dawn to hear Chayton's proposal. Elder faces showed skepticism as Araminta spread the government documents across woven mats. She pointed to specific clauses that revealed the true scope of the land seizure. Railroad surveys had been conducted months before any treaty discussions. Mineral rights had already been sold to Eastern investors. The reservation offered in exchange was worthless scrub land that could barely support prairie dogs, much less an entire tribe. Araminta's finger traced the legal language that transformed theft into policy. Her clear explanations cut through bureaucratic deception like a blade through fog. The elders began to understand they were not facing relocation, but systematic destruction. Some council members remained suspicious of the outsider woman's influence. They questioned whether Chayton had been bewitched by his strange bride. Others recognized the value of intelligence, regardless of its source. Young Bear, Chayton's closest friend since childhood, spoke the doubts many harbored. How could they trust someone sent by their enemies? Perhaps this was an elaborate trap designed to weaken their resolve from within. Chayton's response silenced the tent. He recounted Araminta's midnight warnings about surprise cavalry inspections. Her information strategy. Failure would mean more than personal disgrace. It would mean cultural extinction. She began documenting everything with methodical precision. Every broken promise in previous treaties, each instance of government officials acting beyond their legal authority, all evidence of corruption in the land seizure process. Chayton provided historical context that strengthened her case. His education had taught him about constitutional law and federal jurisdiction. Together, they built a legal foundation that could challenge the relocation order in territorial courts. The work consumed their days and nights. Araminta interviewed tribal elders about past treaty violations, while Chayton gathered documentation from trading post records and military correspondence. Slowly, a pattern of systematic fraud emerged. Their investigation attracted unwanted attention. Reverend Boone arrived unannounced one morning, claiming concern for the treaty's success. His pale eyes studied the camp's unusual activity with barely concealed suspicion. Boone questioned several tribal members about their new routines. Why were children spending time making marks on paper instead of learning traditional skills? What purpose did these strange meetings serve? Araminta watched the Reverend's interrogation from a distance. Something about his intensity suggested more than casual interest. His questions focused specifically on literacy activities and document collection efforts. That evening, Naomi Gray appeared at their fire with urgent news. She had overheard conversations in Cedar Ridge that chilled her blood. Someone was feeding information to military commanders about the tribe's internal discussions. The revelations struck like a physical blow. They had a spy among them. Someone was reporting their resistance efforts to authorities who could crush their legal challenge before it reached court. Chayton's face darkened as he considered the implications. Very few people knew the full scope of their documentation project. The circle of trust suddenly felt dangerously small. Araminta's mind raced through recent events. Boone's unexpected visit, his specific questions about their activities, his obvious disappointment when he found the camp peaceful, rather than preparing for war. Understanding crystallized with terrible clarity. The Reverend did not want the treaty to succeed. He needed it to fail spectacularly to justify the military solution he favored. The strategy worked better than expected. Within days, cavalry patrols began searching empty areas where they expected to find hidden weapons caches that existed only in fabricated reports. Confidence grew as their evidence file expanded. Araminta's documentation now included sworn statements from tribal members, copies of fraudulent surveys, and correspondence between government officials discussing illegal land sales. Chayton contributed his own testimony about mission school teachings regarding constitutional protections for all peoples under federal jurisdiction. His educated voice would carry weight in territorial courts accustomed to dismissing Indian complaints as savage gibberish. Their partnership had evolved beyond marriage of convenience into genuine collaboration. Long hours working together revealed shared values and complementary skills. Respect deepened into something warmer and more precious. Araminta found herself looking forward to their evening strategy sessions as much for Chayton's company as for the work itself. His quiet strength provided anchor points in turbulent emotional waters. Similarly, Chayton discovered joy in Araminta's quick intelligence and fierce determination. She approached each challenge with creativity born from years of surviving impossible circumstances. Her resilience inspired his own courage. The 30-day deadline approached with alarming speed. Their legal case was strong but untested. Success depended on reaching territorial authorities before military action made documentation irrelevant. Everything hinged on the next crucial weeks. Two outcasts, armed with truth, would challenge an entire system designed to erase inconvenient peoples from valuable land. The real test was about to begin. The morning brought an unexpected visitor to their fire. Naomi Gray approached with documents clutched against her chest and fear etched in her weathered features. She glanced around nervously before settling beside Araminta on the woven blanket. Her revelation changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. Naomi was not simply a mixed heritage woman caught between worlds. She was a federal investigator sent by the Interior Department to document corruption in treaty negotiations across the Western Territories. Araminta felt the ground shift beneath her as Naomi explained her true mission. Suspicions about fraudulent land deals had reached Washington. High-ranking officials needed evidence to prosecute the widespread conspiracy that was coordinated the largest land theft in American history. The scope of the conspiracy dwarfed anything Araminta had imagined. This was not isolated greed, but organized criminal enterprise operating at the highest levels of government. Their small resistance effort had stumbled into something far more dangerous than simple treaty violations. Naomi needed their unique access to both communities for her investigation to succeed. Araminta could document the human cost of the fraudulent policies, while Chaitin provided testimony about broken government promises spanning decades. The request placed them at the center of a legal battle with national implications. Success could protect not just Chaitin's tribe, but indigenous peoples across the continent. Failure would eliminate the last hope for justice, while marking them as enemies of powerful interests. Araminta studied Chaitin's face as he wrestled with the decision. Trust came hard to someone whose people had been betrayed repeatedly by government representatives bearing false promises. Finally, he spoke with quiet resolve. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. If federal authorities were finally ready to prosecute the criminals stealing tribal lands, then cooperation served his people's long-term survival. Their investigation expanded dramatically as Naomi shared her accumulated evidence. Files contained correspondence between territorial governors and railroad executives discussing specific land parcels before any treaties were signed. Survey reports detailed mineral deposits on supposedly worthless reservation sites. The paper trail revealed breathtaking arrogance among the conspirators. They had documented their crimes with casual confidence that no one would dare challenge their authority. Their hubris became the weapon that would destroy them. Araminta's role evolved from documenting local fraud to exposing a national scandal. Her literacy skills proved invaluable in cross-referencing dates, names, and financial transactions that established clear patterns of criminal behavior. Chaitin contributed historical testimony that provided context for the government's systematic betrayals. His education allowed him to speak as an articulate witness, rather than a savage making incomprehensible complaints. Their work attracted increasingly dangerous attention. Reverend Boone's visits became more frequent and aggressive. His questions probed specific details about their documentation efforts. Deception worked until Boone discovered inconsistencies in their fabricated materials. His fury erupted during what should have been a routine blessing ceremony. He accused Araminta of corrupting Chaitin's mind with seditious ideas about challenging lawful government authority. The confrontation revealed Boone's desperation to sabotage their legal resistance. He needed the treaty to fail, violently, to justify military action that would clear the land for his financial backers. Their peaceful approach threatened profits worth millions of dollars. That night, Naomi brought terrifying news from her contacts in Austin. Federal marshals were being sent to arrest Araminta on charges of inciting rebellion among peaceful Indians. The warrant would arrive within days. The accusation was legally meaningless but politically effective. Once imprisoned, Araminta could not testify about the conspiracy or present evidence to territorial courts. Her documentation would disappear, along with her freedom. Chaitin's response was immediate and decisive. If they wanted to destroy Araminta for seeking justice, they would have to go through him first. He would not allow another betrayal of someone who had proven their loyalty through actions. Their time was running out, faster than anyone had anticipated. The territorial hearing in Austin represented their only chance to present evidence before arrest warrants made testimony impossible. Naomi arranged emergency transportation and legal representation for the dangerous journey. Federal investigators would provide protection during the hearing in exchange for complete cooperation with the corruption probe. Everything they had worked toward now depended on reaching Austin alive with their evidence intact. The criminals they were exposing had too much at stake to allow their testimony without violent resistance. As they prepared for departure, Araminta reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she was invisible seamstress, expected to disappear without trace. Now, she held evidence that could reshape federal policy toward indigenous peoples across the continent. The transformation from discarded pawn to key witness proved that even the most powerless individuals could change history when armed with truth and courage. Their journey toward justice was about to begin. The ultimatum arrived with the Dawn Patrol. Federal cavalry surrounded the camp at first light, their uniforms dark against the pale morning sky. The commanding officer's largest ceremonial tent. Heated voices rose and fell as leaders debated their final options. Some demanded immediate flight toward the Mexican border. Others favored negotiating terms for peaceful surrender. Young Bear spoke for the war faction with passionate intensity. Death in battle held more honor than slow starvation on barren reservation land. Their ancestors would not forgive cowardice in the face of such betrayal. Grey Wolf countered with the wisdom of his years. Their children deserved life more than their warriors deserved glorious death. Survival meant adaptation, not destruction. The debate continued through the morning as precious hours disappeared. Araminta felt the crushing weight of responsibility as all eyes turned toward her during crucial moments. Her untested legal strategy had brought them to this desperate crossroads. Chayton finally rose to address the council with quiet authority. They had one path remaining that honored both courage and wisdom. The territorial hearing in Austin offered their final chance to expose the conspiracy and protect other tribes from similar destruction. The proposal met fierce resistance from traditional voices. Why trust the white man's courts when those same institutions had authorized every previous betrayal? What hope existed in legal proceedings designed to legitimize theft? Araminta stood to answer their doubts with evidence spread across the tent floor. Documents revealed federal officials acting beyond legal authority. Correspondence proved coordination between government agents and private interests. The conspiracy violated laws that even corrupt courts would be forced to acknowledge. Her presentation swayed several wavering council members. The younger warriors recognized that intelligence could succeed where force would certainly fail. Even some elders admitted that traditional warfare offered no path to survival. The vote was close, but decisive. They would delay any military response while Araminta presented their case to territorial authorities. Success would vindicate the peaceful approach. Failure would at least expose the truth before the inevitable end. Preparations for the Austin journey began immediately. Naomi coordinated with her federal contacts to ensure safe passage and legal representation. The evidence files were copied and hidden in multiple locations to prevent complete destruction if their party was attacked. Chayton insisted on accompanying Araminta despite the personal risk. Marshals offered little comfort during the long miles toward Austin. Dust clouds marked their progress across the endless prairie, while Araminta reviewed her testimony one final time. Every detail had to be perfect when their moment came. Chayton rode beside the wagon on his painted horse, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Reverend Boone had disappeared from the area immediately after the cavalry ultimatum, suggesting coordination with hostile forces determined to prevent their testimony. Their first night on the trail brought unwelcome visitors. Riders approached their camp after midnight, their faces hidden by darkness and bandanas. The lead horseman demanded they surrender all documents related to treaty negotiations. The federal marshals responded with professional efficiency. Warning shots convinced the would-be thieves to retreat without violence, but the message was clear. Powerful interests would use any means necessary to silence their accusations. Morning brought fresh resolve despite the overnight threat. Araminta organized her evidence files with methodical precision, while Chayton practiced testimony that would demonstrate his education and credibility to skeptical officials. The second day's journey revealed the scope of opposition they faced. Telegraph lines buzzed with messages coordinating efforts to discredit their testimony. Newspaper editorials began appearing that portrayed Araminta as a dangerous radical, corrupting peaceful Indians with seditious ideas. Austin's skyline appeared on the third day, like a distant promise of justice or doom. The territorial capital housed both corrupt officials who had authorized the land theft and federal investigators determined to expose the conspiracy. Their hotel provided modest accommodations under heavy guard. Federal marshals maintained constant surveillance, while Naomi made final preparations with sympathetic territorial judges willing to hear evidence of widespread corruption. The territorial hearing was scheduled for the following morning in the Capitol building's main courtroom. News of the unusual proceedings had spread throughout the city, drawing curious spectators and hostile opponents in equal measure. Araminta spent her final evening reviewing testimony that could reshape federal policy toward indigenous peoples across the Western Territories. Her words would either expose the criminals stealing tribal lands or mark the end of legal resistance to systematic genocide. Chayton sat back, degrees of skepticism and hostility. Araminta entered the packed courtroom with documents clutched against her chest, feeling the weight of hundreds of stares. Judge Harrison called the proceedings to order with sharp raps of his gavel. His weathered face revealed nothing as he reviewed the extraordinary petition requesting emergency suspension of the Comanche relocation order based on allegations of systematic fraud. Araminta rose to address the court with steady voice, despite her racing heart. She began methodically, presenting evidence of fraudulent surveys conducted months before treaty negotiations. Her clear explanations cut through bureaucratic language to reveal the conspiracy beneath. Railroad correspondence proved coordination between private interests and government officials. Survey maps showed mineral deposits on supposedly worthless reservation land. Financial records documented illegal payments to territorial governors who approved the fraudulent treaties. The courtroom grew silent as Araminta's presentation continued. Her education, hidden from the world for years, now served justice with devastating precision. Every document was dated, verified, and cross-referenced to establish an unbreakable chain of criminal evidence. Chayton took the stand with dignity that surprised officials accustomed to dismissing Indian testimony as savage gibberish. His fluent English and educated manner forced them to confront their assumptions about tribal intelligence and capability. He testified about decades of broken promises and systematic betrayals. His mission school education lent credibility to historical accounts that might otherwise be dismissed as primitive complaints. The pattern of government fraud stretched back 20 years. Naomi presented her federal investigation files with bureaucratic authority that silenced potential objections. Her official credentials transformed local accusations into a national scandal, requiring immediate federal intervention. The evidence overwhelmed even the most skeptical observers. Railroad executives had purchased tribal lands before any treaties were signed. Government surveyors had mapped mineral deposits while negotiating supposedly fair exchanges for worthless desert territory. Reverend Boone entered the courtroom during afternoon testimony, with several supporters attempting to disrupt the proceedings. Judge Harrison ordered immediate removal of anyone interfering with legal testimony, effectively silencing the opposition's last desperate gambit. The territorial prosecutor, initially skeptical, territories. Her voice carried moral authority earned through years of surviving injustice while maintaining faith in eventual accountability. She spoke not just for Chayton's tribe, but for all peoples whose lands had been stolen through systematic fraud disguised as legal policy. The courtroom remained silent as she concluded her testimony. Even hostile spectators seemed moved by the dignity and intelligence of someone they had dismissed as insignificant. Her transformation from invisible seamstress to articulate advocate challenged every assumption about worth and capability. Judge Harrison retired to consider evidence that implicated numerous territorial and federal officials in criminal conspiracy. The scope of documented fraud required immediate suspension of all related relocation orders, pending full investigation. The ruling came at dawn. Federal marshals would take custody of all suspects named in the evidence files. Military action against the Comanche was suspended indefinitely, while corruption charges proceeded through proper legal channels. Araminta and Chayton received the news in their hotel room as Austin awakened to headlines proclaiming the territorial government's downfall. Reverend Boone faced federal charges for conspiracy and incitement. Railroad executives would answer for bribery and fraud. The immediate danger had passed, but larger challenges remained. Rebuilding trust between communities required sustained effort from people willing to bridge cultural divides through mutual respect and understanding. 6 months later, Araminta stood before a mixed gathering of settlers and tribal members in the newly established community school. Her voice carried across the crowded room as she advocated for official recognition of tribal land rights based on corrected legal precedents. Children of all backgrounds sat together in the front rows, their faces reflecting hope for a future built on justice rather than exploitation. The integrated education she had pioneered was expanding throughout the territory as other communities recognized its value. Chayton watched from the back of the room with quiet pride as his wife addressed the assembly. Their marriage, begun as political necessity, had grown into genuine partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. The school they had built together served both communities while preparing young people for a changing world. Traditional knowledge combined with modern education created strength that neither culture could achieve alone. They proceeded against the conspirators. The changes rippled outward from their small beginning, inspiring similar resistance efforts across the Western territories. Other communities discovered that intelligence and legal action could succeed where violence would certainly fail. Araminta reflected on her transformation from discarded pawn to respected leader as stars appeared in the clear night sky. Love had indeed taught her its true meaning through partnership with someone who valued her mind and spirit above all else. Their story proved that even the most powerless individuals could reshape history when armed with courage, truth, and the determination to build justice from the ground up. The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities their younger selves could never have imagined.